Good evening, everybody. Today is Monday, October 19th, 2020. This is a Moscow City Council meeting. Gina?
Good evening, everyone. Nice to see all your half of your happy faces. Please stand and join us in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Gina.
You're welcome, sir.
Okay, with the first order of what we've got on our plate tonight is a proclamation for Domestic Violence Action Month. Whereas domestic violence violates an individual's dignity, security, humanity, and is a crime with sweeping effects on our community's safety and health. And whereas survivors should have help to find compassion and healing they deserve, and perpetrators of violence should be held accountable for their actions. And whereas all residents of Moscow should feel safe and at peace in their homes. And whereas our youth deserves information and education on healthy relationships, boundaries, and consent. And whereas Alternatives to Violence of the Palouse is committed to ending violence in our community through the prevention, education, and providing services to those affected by violence for over 39 years. And whereas a local coalition of organizations exists to directly confront domestic violence, including law enforcement officers, victim advocates, prosecutors, healthcare providers, faith leaders, and concerned Moscow residents. And whereas the City of Moscow is an important partner in ATVP's vision to create a community that is safe, equitable, and free from oppressions that lead to domestic violence. Now, therefore, I, Bill Lambert, the mayor of the City of Moscow, do hereby proclaim the month of October 2020 as Domestic Violence Action Month in the City of Moscow, and I encourage all citizens to reflect and honor victims and survivors of domestic violence in our community, and also use this month to take action towards ending violence on the Palouse. And with that, today we have from Alternatives to Violence of the Palouse, Alita Jacobman, are you here with us this evening? Okay, if you come up, I will present you this proclamation. We usually have pictures, and we shake, and we hug, and we do all those things, which we're not going to do this year. But I'm telling you, next year, how about that? We'll be on. But here it is. And if you would like to have a few minutes and read what you'd like, how's that sound? Okay,
Thank you. Uh-huh. Hello, everyone. Thank you, Mayor Lambert. Very appreciative of you signing that proclamation. ATVP appreciates City of Moscow recognizing October as Domestic Violence Awareness Month. Domestic violence impacts over 10 million people annually. Here on the Palouse, we serve approximately 600 individuals impacted by domestic violence each year. ATVP is 40 years strong, and in those years, we've been a consistent resource for survivors in the Palouse community. All our services are free, confidential, and offered 24/7. We provide an array of supportive services, including, but not limited to, crisis intervention, medical, and legal advocacy, shelter, and support groups. On behalf of our agency, we sincerely thank the city for acknowledging the prevalence and helping to raise awareness and to take action against domestic violence. I challenge all of you here today to learn more about domestic violence and its impact on our community. So I thank you, and I hope that you guys have a good rest of your meeting today.
Alita, I got to share a little story with you, because it's been, Alternatives to Violence on the Palouse has been here for 39 years, and back in the early 80s I served on the United Way board, and I can remember when they came in, because I was on the agenda committee for grants for various organizations. And so I have fond memories of talking to numerous people that's been associated with alternatives to violence through all these years and years. And man, that kind of dates me a little bit, doesn't it?
No.
But with that being said, it's unfortunate that we have to have that, but it's fortunate that we do have it, because it has been something that has perpetually been an issue anywhere in any community. So thank you very much for what you're work that you do as well as the other members on
Yes.
ATVP.
Thank you so much. And I also, to do this work long-term, violence can be preventable and it can be prevented because it is a learned behavior. So
Yes, it can.
take hope with that.
Okay. Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, with that, we will move on to item number 1, which is the consent agenda.
I move approval of the consent agenda as presented.
Second.
Okay, we've got a motion by Art and a second by Gina to approve the consent agenda as is. I'll start the roll with Ann,
Aye.
Randy,
Aye.
Maureen,
Aye.
Sandra,
Aye.
Gina,
Aye.
and Art.
Aye.
Okay, very well. With that, we will move on to item number 2, staff recognition report. Gary, do you have anything for us this evening, sir?
No, sir.
Mayor's appointments, I have none this evening. And so with that, we will move on to item number 4, which is public comment and mayor's response period. We allow some time for this, of course, at every one of our meetings, as long as it is not on this evening's agenda and/or something that is front of planning and zoning or the Board of Adjustments. And with that being said, please come up. We'll give you 3 minutes and tell us what's on your mind.
David Hall, 1334 Wallen Road, Moscow. Just popped in my head an instant ago. Just to notice that the Palouse Basin Water Summit will be this Thursday, Facebook, Zoom. You can go to their webpage, 6 to 8 p.m., online only. So that will be good. And I know
Yep.
our honorable mayor will be presenting there at the beginning, so.
I will, David.
Let
Thank you
people
for
know.
bringing that up, because I will do a small welcome and presentation. You come, and as will Mayor Glenn Johnson from Pullman, and that's something that him and I over the years have enjoyed tag teaming together. And of course, we've always, and you've been there for every single one of them, we always have several hundred people, 200 to 300 people at least. I think last year was a record amount. We had it over at Schweitzer Engineering the last several years. And so those are the types of things that we miss. But guess what? They will come back to us.
Yep.
And we don't ever give up, and we'll keep plugging away. So thank you, Dave.
Available online, and they will have a drawing for a low flush toilet again this year somehow.
Yes, exactly.
apparently, But no free meal this time.
Exactly. Thank you, David. Anybody else like to come up and address it before we move on? Well, okay, with that, we will move on to item number 5, Citizens Commission report. We got Parks and Rec Commission, Dwight Curtis and Robbie Cooper with us this evening to give us a rundown on Parks and Rec. Welcome, Dwight.
Where are we? There it is. Oh, and now you need to go back to. Sorry, guys. There you go. Now you're ready.
All right, well, thank you.
One last thing. Now you're ready to go.
Just glad it was him this time instead of me. So I'm probably not going to tell you anything here you don't already know, but I just wanted to reiterate a few things. I'd like to introduce Dr. Robbie Cooper. He's the chair of the City of Moscow Parks and Recreation Commission. He's just finishing up his second year as the chair of the commission, and it's also his 6th year on the commission. The Parks and Rec Commission is a community builder. It's a key element, essential public service for the citizens of Moscow. Of those essential community services, there is economic value, health, and environmental benefits. And in this day of COVID and the isolation and strife that we're all experiencing, there's also the social importance. Parks and Rec programs and the parks themselves are vitally important to establishing and maintaining the quality of life in the Moscow community, ensuring health of our citizens, and contributing to the economic and environmental well-being of this community and region. Our Parks and Rec commissioners work hard to see that the city council and mayor has the information and recommendations needed to continue these essential services to the best of their abilities. It's also an honor and a pleasure working with Robbie and the rest of the Parks and Recreation Commission. And with that, I'll turn it over to Robbie.
Okay. Welcome, Robbie.
Thank you. Thanks, Dwight, and thank you, Mayor and Council, for having me tonight. This is, I think, the third one of these I've done.
Yep.
So to start off the presentation, just introduce our commission. There's myself, Susan Peterson, Mark Heinlein. Susan's been with us since 2018, Mark since 2013. Justin Minden since 2014. Nancy Tribble was our former chair that preceded me. She's been with us since 2009. Damon Burton's been with us since, I believe, the 1800s, or 1991 rather. And Susan Steele since 2003, Ted Kisha, who is my vice chair, since 2004, and Sarah Zaski since 2018. To start, just to share the mission of the Parks Department. The Parks Department enriches Moscow's quality of life by providing well-designed and properly maintained parks and recreation opportunities for all citizens. Services include development and maintenance of parks and community forestry, recreational sports facilities, aquatics, playgrounds, trails, open spaces, and city office buildings, in addition to offering a vast array of individual and group recreation programs. Some things about what we've been up to with the Commission and the Parks Department. Obviously, COVID has had a huge impact on us this year, needing to close parks and facilities. The Parks Department has had to do a lot of work signing things, fencing things at times to keep people out. I know you can't really keep my 3-year-old out of a playground unless you lock it up. So they did a good job doing that sort of thing and maintaining those facilities. There's a lot of extra work these days. The aquatic center was pretty heavily impacted, as you all are well aware. So there was some kind of back and forth and waiting for decisions to be made, and ultimately they were able to offer lap swimming only, but at least offering that to the public of Moscow. The older children's play structure, so one of the 2 playground structures at Rotary Park, was replaced. Damon, I think the old one was just kind of worn out. It was a wooden structure. It was just kind of worn out, so they replaced that. A pathway was installed at Atani Park, completing the connection between Atani Drive and Crestview Drive. Which I think is an important thing in neighborhoods like that. My neighborhood's kind of like that, where you've got cul-de-sacs and winding streets and things that are really pretty, but sometimes keep people from getting to point A, point B without getting in a car. So I don't think that's any small thing. Arbor Day Planting. Arbor Day also affected by COVID this year, but they did do some plantings in Harvest Park, planting apple trees and the plant guilds around them to support them. Also, the installation of 3 interpretive signs, 2 of them historical. So at Ordinance Park, historical signage on Lillian Woodworth Otness, and at Alman Asbury Llewellyn Park, history of the Llewellyn family. And then the one that was really cool, just from someone sitting on the commission in the meeting room, the Mountain View Park was a physics at play signage placed next to the playground that the kids in a science class at Palouse Prairie Charter School designed and made a very cool presentation to our commission. It was one of the funnest things I think we've seen in that room, is this whole class of school children coming in and telling us about how, you can find physics in the park and making this cool signage about it. So that was really, really fun. And then landscaping around the north couplet, where that new art piece is now located. Mm-hmm. Some images of these things. So there's Rotary Park playground replacement. That fence is just because it was being constructed, I believe, not because of COVID, but that's the new playground replacement that went in there. The interpretive sign at Llewellyn Park. This is one example of closure where they had to fence off the Lena Whitmore Park. This is the new interpretive sign at Optimus Park. And then there was a scooter trick competition. Was that Karen Johnston organized that? Yes. And they did this scooter trick competition there at the skate park. I did not attend. That would be way too much anxiety for me, watching kids fly around on concrete. I get real nervous about that kind of stuff. All right. Coming up, some pretty cool stuff. The development of 4 pickleball courts on Gourmet Park, which is a great repurposing of some kind of old, worn-out tennis courts, in response to requests we've had multiple times from the public, and we've even had people come to commission meetings and ask us for pickleball offerings, so that's going to be really great. New playground equipment at Milton Arthur Park, a unisex restroom at Indian Hills Park, which is one of our newer parks, a couple of ADA improvements at Mountain View Park, so a connector path connecting the kind of further parking lot to the main parking lot and providing easier access to things like restrooms. Those restrooms also will be updated to be more in line with ADA guidelines. A new play structure at the pool, hopefully we'll be able to use next summer. Pathway repairs along the Good Samaritan Care Center. Some new lighting on the Paradise Path between where the South Couplet is and where Berman Creekside Park is. And then continuing to work on efforts to see if it's appropriate to reduce pesticide use in city parks and grounds. So that was started last summer or summer before. It's kind of doing some little experimental plots and seeing what it looks like to reduce pesticides and kind of use other measures. And that's about it. It's been a crazy year for us, lots of adjustments to make. Not for me, not near as many things to worry about as you all, but it's been kind of a unique year, to say the least. So, any questions?
Well, Robbie, the Parks and Rec Commission has always done an outstanding job in everything they've done, and we all look forward to getting things as we go along back a little bit more to normal. Like hopefully the pool will be open this next summer, and a bunch of different things where we can resume activities like we've all known how they've been in the past. One thing it does do for us is that it does kind of tell us that when things come up and we need to make some adjustments, we have all made adjustments. Every single person in our town has, all of us. Some have been easier than others, of course. But the catch is we'll work through it and we'll get going with it, and we'll never give up with it. We'll keep continuing on with the things we're doing. But anyway, you guys do a great job, and tell all the commission my appreciation. Anybody on council have questions for Robbie? Sandra?
Actually, not a question. I just really wanted to say thanks on one. I could say thanks on all of it, and I mean that. But Parks and Rec do such a varied work. And I really want to say a friend of mine who has spent his whole career doing interpretive signs, and he was a former state historian, and I've done a share of interpretive signs. Thank you for putting those up. I don't think people understand that actually comes from Parks and Rec, and I think it's a huge bonus to our community, and they're really nice. I'm grateful for them. When I travel, I look for those, and it's really great to recognize some of the founders of our great little Moscow here. So thanks for adding that to your list.
Yeah, that's definitely something that we've thought about, and you can see other parks around town with historical signage in them. I think it's really important. When we named Morgan's Orchard Park, that was historically motivated, so thanks for recognizing that. I think that's really, it's an important thing as well.
Okay, other comments for Robbie? Well, one thing I will say, in 2021 will mark 30 years for Damon Burton, and I've known him for that many years, and he really doesn't look a whole lot different now than what he did back then. Just saying that, either that or my eyes maybe got a little worse. But that guy has been committed to the Park and Rec Commission for decades, and that's amazing. But that just goes to show you a good volunteer that's just been consistently year after year after year. Anyway, thanks, Robbie, for the good work you all do.
Yeah, thank you all. Have a good night.
Good night. Okay, with that, we are going to move on to item number 6, which is a public hearing and ordinance and amending Title 4, Chapter 3 of Moscow City Code requiring amendments to the Telecommunications Code to establish standards for small wireless facilities, formerly known as 5G. We've got Michael Ray here to explain to us everything. And so, Mike, you have the floor.
Thank you, Your Honor, council members. So before you tonight, we have a public hearing, and this is in regards to a small wireless facility amendment into our existing telecommunications code, which is contained in the zoning code. So just to give you kind of some broad background about cellular communications, originally designed to transport voice communications. Those voice communications were easily handled in those tall kind of macro cell towers or multiple towers throughout the city. But over the last 10 years, technology has evolved, wireless data demand has grown, and those legacy towers are being overwhelmed with wireless data traffic. And new 5G high-speed deployment, which has been advertised and starting to begin, will bring much higher data speeds and traffic. And to meet this increased demand, those providers are deploying new small cell installations to accommodate the data. So these are the traditional macro cell towers that you see throughout the city. This one here on the left side is East Side Marketplace, in the rear of that development. And then this is more of a monopole stealth tower, so all the antennae are contained within the tower itself. And this is located over by A and Baker Street here on the right of your screen. We also have a lot of other structure-mounted antennas. So Theophilus Tower contains numerous antenna at the very top, pretty much on all sides. McConnell Building downtown contains quite a few as well. And of course we have numerous ones on the water tanks, the water towers that are most commonly in city parks throughout the city. And this is just to give you kind of a rendering of what cities can expect as far as small cell installations. This is existing conditions, and a lot of times these will be installed on existing utility poles, like the one pictured here. It's more of just a telephone pole. And you can see the proposal typically end up with some type of antenna on the very top, and then an equipment shroud mounted to the side, and then they'll tie into fiber optic and power in the ground. Another couple examples here, just more historic fixtures. So the one on the right, powder-coated black, more historic luminaires there, and then you can see the cantenna. That's what they typically refer to those as at the very top. And then you see a standard just light pole on the left of your screen. You can see the cantenna sticking out the top of that as well. Just a couple more examples. This is Central Park, New York City. There's a small antenna sticking out from the existing light pole here. And then this is commonly what you'd see with just the new freestanding poles just for small cell. You'd see the pole here, as well as I believe this one does have a light mask coming off the side of it. But along with this comes visual clutter concerns. So you can see these are some bad examples of some of the aesthetic concerns that you could run into with multiple carriers, multiple antennas on existing telephone poles. So taking a look at our current telecommunications code, does not address small cell facilities, so really doesn't allow for them. So it does not distinguish between macro cell towers and small cell poles. Those new towers and poles would require a conditional use permit. Co-location, it's typically when you locate an antenna on an existing support structure. So an existing support structure is something that wasn't originally intended to contain an antenna. So it really could be anything. So it is allowed by right in all zones right now, so long as the antenna does not project more than 18 feet above or 8 feet away horizontally from support structure in residential districts, may project further in commercial districts. So this is just, regulations that were built for those larger macro cell towers. But we do include, don't specifically say small cell or small wireless facilities in our existing code, but they would apply currently within the code. And the big concern is there's no design standards currently within the code that would address some of the aesthetic concerns that come along with the small wireless facilities. So taking a look at kind of our objectives with the small wireless facility program, to provide reasonable access to the desired services, minimize that visual clutter, make sure the installations are aesthetically pleasing as possible, ensure they do not obstruct sidewalks and roadways, do not interfere with light fixture function, if they're going to be co-located on an existing street light, and then create a permitting system that can facilitate processing of applications within the allotted time period. And I've got a slide here coming up after this one that discusses that. Well, first I wanted to cover the Telecommunications Act. It's 1996 is when that act was established. And it says that local jurisdictions have to provide telecommunications providers reasonable access within the public right-of-way, cannot effectively deny the ability to provide service. And local governments are prohibited from regulating them based upon those radio frequency emissions and effectively prohibiting delivery of the service. And attached to your packet tonight is a legal memo from Mia, city attorney, you can consult with, and certainly staff and Planning and Zoning Commission has throughout this proposed process. So taking a look at a new ruling that was issued by the FCC, and that occurred at the end of September 2018, was intended to streamline really rollout of 5G throughout the United States. It included kind of maximum fees that local municipalities can charge for small cell applications and right-of-way use. And then it defined a shot clock decision time frame. So pretty much the processing of local government from the submittal of the application to when everything needs to be processed. So it's 60 days for co-location upon an existing pole and 90 days for the new standalone small cell towers. And then a new appeal process for shot clock violations. So going through the draft ordinance before you tonight, first, we have inserted a definition of a small wireless facility, and this is pretty much consistent throughout other jurisdictions, consistent with the FCC definition as well. And then we have small wireless facility standards. Those apply to new facilities as well as co-location upon existing facilities. And then there's really three categories of installations: the co-location, replacement, and for existing antenna support structure, so it could be a light pole, replacing that with a combination light pole and small cell tower. And then you could just have new small wireless facility antennas or antenna towers that are just exclusively used for the small cell wireless facilities and nothing else. So we'll go through in a little more detail the co-location upon existing support structures. So it would be a permitted use throughout the city. Antennas can't extend more than 5 feet above, 2 feet horizontally, and along with the equipment must be shrouded. And there are shroud standards. So side-mounted equipment requires certain heights above sidewalks. It'd be 8 feet, and then roadways is 14 feet, which is consistent with essentially all those encroachments within our city. And top-mounted can't extend more than 5 feet in height and limits outside diameter to 14 inches. So that's that cantenna that's mounted to the top. Equipment can't interfere with street lighting. So if you have one of these that's existing street light, you have that equipment shroud is usually located below the light itself. Have to be located to a side where it's not going to interfere with the casting of the street light. And so this would be an example based upon our standards what this would look like. You can typically see a existing utility pole co-location. There's going to be an equipment shroud, contains an antenna. There'll be another equipment shroud, and then it all ties into electrical and fiber, which is in the ground. There are other options for the equipment shroud, and certainly cable companies. You typically see these sometimes where it's actually mounted to the cable itself horizontally. So that would be another option. This is an example of an existing wooden street light, and you can see the cantenna, being mounted to the top, similar equipment shrouds throughout, and then tied into electrical and fiber in the ground. The next category would be the replacement of these existing antenna support structures. So we're using the example here of light poles. So permitted as long as the replacement is the same quality, color, design, style as the existing. It has to be the same height, which excludes the top-mounted antennas, designed to internally accommodate all equipment, so all contained within the pole itself. And then we address the historic light fixtures that you see in kind of near downtown areas can't be replaced with another style of a pole or fixture unless the applicant can demonstrate that the proposed replacement will not disrupt or interfere with the visual theme and style of lighting within the surrounding area. And this would be an example of the replacement, so replacing the whole pole itself, all the equipment's contained within the pole, and then you have the mast and the luminaire, as well as the cantenna protruding from the top. And now we arrive at our last category, which is the new small wireless facility antenna towers. 40-foot height limitation unless a conditional use permit is approved through the Board of Adjustment. Similar to the replacement, designed to internally accommodate all of the equipment. Only one shroud permitted. Has to be located no closer than 250 away from another small wireless facility antenna tower. It doesn't apply to co-locations or replacement combinations. It's just the new standalone antenna tower that this distance would apply to. Tower shall consist of powder-coated black steel pole and no more than 14-inch diameter antenna shrouds. So this is just mimicking what we typically see near downtown with the black powder-coated with our new kind of street light style. And this would be an example of just the new standalone pole. You typically just have the pole with all the equipment contained within, and then the cantenna on the very top. Just wanted to briefly go over a recommendation. So tangentially, as the Planning and Zoning Commission was working on this amendment, the Sustainable Environment Commission was also taking a look at the environmental and health effects. We wanted to bring the two commissions together and discuss a potential unified recommendation. The chair, Wendy McClure, as well as myself, ended up meeting with the Sustainable Environment Commission that occurred June 16th of this year. And SEC, through much discussion, ultimately recommended that the Planning and Zoning Commission continue with the draft ordinance, mainly addressing the safety and aesthetic concerns, but Sustainable Environment Commission would continue to monitor kind of the changing legal landscape that continues to evolve on the emissions and potential health effects. At a future date, SEC may put forth a recommendation to address health concerns if that legal avenue becomes available. So with that, just wanted to briefly go over Planning and Zoning Commission's recommendation, and they conducted a public hearing on September 9th, and they recommended approval of the proposed ordinance with a minor modification. So staff's recommendation before you tonight is, after conducting the public hearing and considering public testimony, approve the proposed ordinance under suspension of the rules requiring 3 complete and separate readings, and that it be read by title and published by summary. And I'd certainly try to answer any questions that you might have.
Okay, Mike, before we get started here, I got some of the emails and a number of things that we've received from folks is about the health concern. Most of the emails that I read concern that. And so you said our Sustainable Environment Committee is going to be monitoring that. Who's going to be monitoring to actually know what that means or does not mean? I think we need a little bit better definition of that.
Well, the Sustainable Environment Commission is just going to stay abreast of the changes. Obviously, our city attorney will be monitoring those changes as well. There's a lot of lower court decisions that occur in different states, and I think our legal department will continue to monitor those changes, and if there becomes an avenue in the future that presents itself to be able to address some of the environmental or health concerns, then certainly, we make the council aware of that. And of course, Sustainable Environment, I think, is going to keep a close eye on the changing climate out there.
Okay, I got one other thing before I turn over to council. Mia Batista, are you with us? You're a city attorney?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, very good, Mia. In case we've got any kind of legal questions that need to be answered by council, I just wanted to make sure you were online with us. Thank you.
Yep.
Questions from the council to Mike before I open the public hearing? Randy.
Well, okay. I was pointing to Art, but I have a question too. So, 2 quick ones. One was really a follow-up to the mayor's, just to understand a little bit more about the mechanism for the SECs moving forward with this. Is it going to be, and perhaps you don't know this, but since you're not their liaison, a regular agenda item where if there's anything new to report, or is this more of that the attorney would be the one to notice and alert the SEC that there's some new information? How do we sort of assure that this follow-up with these court cases doesn't get lost?
I don't know that I can necessarily speak to the inner workings of the commission, but Victoria Seaver's here and she's on the commission. She could certainly elaborate on how they
Okay.
plan to continue to monitor the situation. But, like all of our commissions, they're advisory to the council and make recommendations. And so I would assume that, as they continue to monitor the situation, that they could bring forth a recommendation to one of the committees in the future if that changes as far as the ability to regulate it.
Art, hang on a second, Art's next, is he,
this is
and then I'll
more
come
of
to you,
a-
Maureen.
A little bit more of a techno question, but with the spacing of 250 feet, does that imply that the range of any particular installation would be 125?
I've heard the range is typically between 500 and 1,000 feet.
So 250 is like crazy close then.
Well, not necessarily. I mean, you could have multiple providers, and so typically you don't have a whole lot of co-location on these small cell towers just because of the size of them, maybe constraints with electrical, it's fiber optic also, and just the structural capacity of the pole itself. And so I don't know that you're going to see a whole lot of co-location there, and so it could be multiple providers. And with that distancing, I mean, it would apply to multiple providers, and so you got to factor in maybe not our area, our network, but, in any other larger city, you're typically going to see maybe 4 or 5 providers that are all competing for that same area. We still want to have that distance, but still have an opportunity for each network to have, an ability to locate in that area without effectively denying their ability to provide the service.
Thanks, good explanation.
Maureen had a question.
Well, I just sat there and thought, SEC is having a meeting before our next meeting, and it may be good for them to talk about specifically what that means. Because I guess I think collectively I was at one meeting and it was kind of mentioned that they should go forward and we're going to stay back. But I think that exactly what we're going to do, what that commission is going to do, isn't clear, and that the decision should be made by them. And I will send a note to Steve about that. And you can also talk about it.
Okay. Other questions for Mike before I open up the public hearing? Go ahead,
My question was about that 250 spacing also. So the way I'm understanding that number was chosen based on thinking the number of potential providers we have and the area of Moscow, it would come down to needing that small of spacing to accommodate as many as we might potentially have? Or is this like what other?
A lot of it was
think-
based upon other research into other jurisdictions and their codes as far as their spacing requirements. But yeah, it's looking at the typical city block. I mean, it's 660 feet is our typical city block, at least in our subdivision regulations. And, that's about half of that distance, and just making sure that we're still going to have coverage within multiple providers. I mean, a large portion is I think, are going to be co-located onto these existing poles, so it wouldn't necessarily apply in those circumstances. But still just trying to minimize the number of freestanding small cell poles that we have, but still being able to provide the service.
And I think there was something in there about, so the existing structures, is there some limit to how closely a single provider can place their facilities on existing?
Not on the existing ones, not on co-location, no.
Okay, well, thank you, Mike. We'll go ahead and we'll open up the public hearing at 7:39, and I will take any type of testimony. Please come up to the podium, state your name, and we will give you 3 minutes to tell us what's on your mind with this 5G. Come on up, David. I know.
David Hall, 1334 Wallen Road, Moscow. I thought I wasn't going to say much since I sent so much written, but I came up with a few words.
Okay.
Council members and Mr. Mayor, this is a complex issue of balancing federal legal issues under a shifting landscape and the responsibility of the city to look after and protect its citizens and visitors. You've received a lot of both new and repeat information to consider, and a lot of it just in the last day or even today, I believe. I ask you to consider continuing the hearing for at least 2 weeks to allow you to review new information and to seek input from the SEC and the other commissions, quite several that, the historical and human rights, that I think have a stake in this and I don't think have commented yet. I also ask you to consider the Idaho Falls Ordinance, written by our former city attorney, Randy Fife, if I recall his name right. It has more on finances and I think health issues that they passed that ordinance and are feeling comfortable. And I think Mr. Fife is a pretty conservative on legal issues and wouldn't be way out in right field where he thinks they would be sued about anything. So we just came across that ordinance to take a look at. I also ask you to maybe take a review of the master license agreement template, which is where the city liabilities are. I think Ms. Bautista's opinion was that nobody should look at it until the final one is executed, and then it would come through the final legal papers, and the city council, I think, then could look at it, but it seems very late in the process. A little bit more. Further, I ask that you include a requirement in the telecoms application that they show that a significant gap in service would be remedied by any installation, and that you retain giving notice to neighbors of the applications. I saw that was stricken out in the latest version. I don't know why that was taken out. Moscow citizens deserve as much protection as possible. One other thing you might do is related is consider a resolution requesting telecoms to not apply for small cell and to prioritize wired, like Hawaii and several other, or at least one other municipality or county has done. It wouldn't have any teeth, but it just record that you're concerned and would rather have wired than wireless if possible. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Anybody else like to come up and talk? Victoria, how about you? Do you have anything you want to add to? Okay. I got to hand it to you, Dave. You gave us a lot of information in 3 minutes and 6 seconds, so I appreciate that. Mia, are you on the line with us? So you are.
Yes.
Could you comment on what David Hall has spoke about on the agreement?
Your Honor, are you going to keep the public hearing open?
Oh, yeah, I wanted to get an answer from Mia first, and then I'll want to see if anybody else wants to.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear what Gary had said.
Well, Gary was asking if I was going to keep the public hearing open. I said yes, until after I get done hearing from you.
What specifically about the master license agreement? So that's something that we actually have a current draft, but no, it's not finalized because it'll depend upon when the application comes through, making sure that all of our standards are in place, and depending on this ordinance and what's contained within it, we may need to modify the master license agreement, and then that's always subject to negotiation with the company that we're going to contract for, that wants to put small wireless facilities in our right of way.
Okay, thank you, Mia. We may come back to you. Is there anybody else that would like to testify?
Can I add one sentence on this?
Come on up, David. You did such a great job.
Thank you. David Hall again. Just today, a national organization that looks at 5G wireless and health issues sent the council a good letter with very good points on health issues that can be, and safety issues that can be put in and have not been challenged by any municipalities. So I know that came really late today, but I would ask you to take a look at that, and it was actually read on air on KRFP evening report this evening at the very end. So if anybody wants to, that's available online to listen to it anytime. But they had some very good points. It's Americans for Responsible Technology out of New York City.
Okay, thank you, David. Anybody else? I will close the public hearing at 7:45, turn it over for council for deliberation. Who would like to start?
I'll go.
Okay, Brandy, go ahead.
Sure. Definitely a complicated issue that I know there's been a lot of time put in with many different parties, planning and zoning, and Mike Ray, and our attorney. I'm not confident that this ordinance includes everything that it possibly could to provide us with, within our legal rights, the ability to reserve as much local control as possible. And that is coming from some of the things that have come in that are not health-related concerns, which I know we cannot base our ordinance on, or prohibit small wireless facilities based on that concern. Seeing some of the other cities' ordinance, including the Idaho Falls that Mr. Hall referenced, I'm wondering specifically about, and the attorney's legal memo, I didn't find anything that precludes us from only allowing the facilities in non-residential zones. So that would, I would be much more comfortable with the ordinance if at least we could say we are not allowing them in non-residential zones. And it doesn't appear to prohibit 5G from coming from anything that I've seen.
I think you'd effectively deny the providers the ability to provide service. If you think of everything east of Mountain View, it's all residential. So would you say that if you pretty much exclude half of the city because they're in residential areas, I think you're effectively denying their ability to provide service?
What if we included a clause that said there could be exceptions when it is not possible otherwise? So I kind of wrote a little of this up. We could include a clause that exceptions may be granted if the applicant can demonstrate the site is required to fill a significant gap, and there's no less intrusive alternative. I feel that this is kind of the time where we have an opportunity to get this as good as we can possibly can. And you've made a lot of changes have come that have made it better and better, but I still think there might be a little more we could do. Could that cover that concern of city liability if we had a clause that exceptions would be made when there is no alternative?
I mean, you could certainly ask Mia about that. I think what you would see is that, they provide documentation saying that there was no service in that area, and then we would have to let them locate a facility there. I mean, it's really not doing anything to stop 5G deployment in those areas.
No, and we
that
can't
question
stop
for-
5G
should that be a
deployment. I mean,
question for
that
me?
wouldn't be the,
Let's have
Yeah.
Mia answer that question. Mia?
So the current legal landscape does not allow us to require that that the company has to fill a gap, or that there has to be a significant gap. And that's actually a Ninth Circuit case. And so we cannot build in that there has to be some service gap that needs to be fulfilled. We have to allow this deployment of this small wireless facilities, and that may require them replacing existing poles and putting in these new small wireless facilities. So we cannot prohibit these from coming in because there currently is no significant gap.
Okay, thank you, Mia. So maybe then what about taking the significant gap portion out of it, where we're still not prohibiting 5G because we can't do that, but we're saying they're excluding residential zones with a clause for exceptions when that is the only possibility that they have. You know, if they can locate in other zones within the city, that would, residential would only be permitted if there were no other options for them to obtain the service that they want.
I think Mike effectively answered that question. I really don't have anything to add to what he said.
Art, you had,
Yeah, I was wondering on the same topic, to flip the argument a little bit, what is the rationale for saying no to establishment of small wireless facilities in a residential area? Why would you want to keep it out?
Well, because of potential health concerns, which we cannot, so we have to be careful legally to make our ordinance such that any restrictions, we may put something in there out of that concern, but if it still is within legal rights to do it based on the FCC ruling, and other cities have done this with no lawsuits, I think it's being creative, and how can we address any potential concerns in the meantime that are still within?
We would need a rationale for why are we denying service in these areas specifically. You can't just say no because we feel like it. There has to be a rationale to do that. And that seems to be a missing part because we're completely hamstrung on this just by the federal legal requirements that we not deny service based on radio frequency health concerns.
Right. I think some of in that letter that we received talking about recommendations that you could include that are not health-related would say the setbacks and restrictions to residential could be due to historic preservation rules, aesthetics, and property devaluation risks. Those could be the reasons.
But we'd have to establish that there is a property devaluation. If you get your average gamer in a residential district and they want a game on their phone, they're going to want it.
Yeah, I think I would just take that information from some of what we've received from different realty associations, findings of property valuation changes associated with it based on surveys. I'm sure you could find gamers that would find more value in it, but I would just go with the.
What I like about it is that there's precedent for it, right? In Idaho as well, as something that, as we're looking at this, kind of potentially murky legal consequences around, what cities can and can't do and the legality of it. But I think that seems like one area that cities are exploring. And so I like the possibility of including that as part of our ordinance.
But then
And I like
again,
that
what
we
is
wouldn't
the
be
rationale for
stepping out of
denying
bounds
it?
for what we're seeing in other municipalities by any means.
okay, so Art, you
But
want
why are we looking to deny service? I
We're-
mean, you can
yeah.
say setbacks and things like that, but I believe that's addressed in the ordinance itself as it exists. Setback issues and things like that. Property devaluation, we do that every single time we establish a new suburb on the outskirts of town. People holler about, you've just devalued my property. We do this all the time too, and it's a nebulous concept as to whether property is actually devalued by the placement of a box on a pole in a residential neighborhood. And so far, I've not heard anything that's stating that this is not perceived restriction due to RF frequency, radio frequency health concerns. So far, everything seems to be based on that, which is still not established. So from what I've seen is the ordinance itself does the best that it can with what we've got. And we can't just arbitrarily say that you can't put it in a residential area and things like that. Additionally, banning it from parks. We've got higher powered 3G, 4G antennas all over our parks already. And so that rather makes that a murky angle as well. So I think the ordinance, within the bounds that are established by the FCC, does everything that it can to give us our bounds of what we can do here.
I'm going to go to Gina. She had her hand up.
I can't say it any better than Art. I believe that we've had this conversation in a bit of a circle right now, and the issue is that we're concerned, or that the concern is not property devaluation, it's health. And we aren't allowed to block based on that. And if it is a health concern, then if we're going to add a whole bunch of stuff to the ordinance, I think we ought to be overt about why we're doing it. And if it is a health concern, say health concern and not property devaluation. I think we are not, we're not in bad hands here. I think that staff and our city attorney have done a good job. Again, similar to what Art said, within the bounds that we can exist. And I think that to try to be creative about adding stuff that really is trying to prevent what we perceive to be health issues, it's not genuine. That bothers me.
I'm going to go to Maureen.
Okay, Mia, this is a question to you, and that is, looking at I'm certain that when you all were drafting this up, you looked at a lot of other places and you looked at a lot of law. Mm-hmm. Is there any law out there on restricting at playgrounds, residential area? Is it that have come out that said you can restrict 5Gs from getting into residential areas, or playgrounds, or school areas?
The cases that I've looked at were specific to like historic districts, and I don't believe that we have one that we would build in separate design standards for that. I believe that was considered and looked at from planning and zoning. Really, it goes back to the safety standards, and so to the RF emissions. And I haven't found anything that said that, we can limit the placement of those in the school areas due to health concerns.
Okay.
So what do you think with all these other cities that actually have done that, and they haven't explained why? That's just one of their things that says it's not permitted in residential zones, for example. Is it just a matter of that will stand until someone sues them, and then they will either retract back down from it, or?
Who's that question for, Mia? Or
I think,
Mike?
well, I was thinking Mia, but Mike.
I mean, in our review, certainly there wasn't numerous cities that had these exceptions. There was, about the most extreme case that I've seen, there's Mill Valley, that pretty much gave their preference to where these were going to be located, but weren't excluding them from certain areas. I haven't seen any, specifically in the state of Idaho, that's restricted them from residential areas.
The one in Idaho Falls was specific to only public rights-of-way in residential areas that are city-owned. Would it be permitted?
It wasn't necessarily. So if you look at that, the comments that were received pertaining to that, if you pull up the ordinance and read the prefix to that section, pretty much it says they're exempt from regulations if they're located in the public right-of-way. So our ordinance requires standards regardless if they're on private property or the public right-of-way. So they're essentially saying if it's in the public right-of-way in Idaho Falls, then it doesn't have to meet any of the standards contained within that ordinance. They have their own master license agreement where they've negotiated that with the utility providers, and they have to meet whatever their standards are. But it's basically saying they're exempt in the right-of-way in Idaho Falls.
Maybe I'm not understanding the utility easement part. In residential zones, small wireless facilities may be located in a utility easement only on a city-owned parcel. Does that mean,
So in new subdivisions,
yeah,
in newer subdivisions, not Fort Russell, not older areas of town, in those areas you have 80-foot right-of-ways, so all the utilities are actually in the right-of-way itself. In newer subdivisions, like east of Mountain View, you'll have a lot narrower right-of-way, it'll be maybe 60, 70 feet, and then behind the sidewalk, 10 feet into those properties, those residential lots, you'll have a franchise utility easement. And that's the utility easement that all the cable providers, Avista, they have transformers that pop up out of the ground, those boxes. That's where they run all the underground equipment. They're actually on, property owner's property, but they have an easement for that. That's what they're referring to with that 15 feet. We just typically do 10 feet here instead of the 15 feet. It's basically saying that it's prohibited from being located within that area. That's something we certainly could put in the ordinance if you wished. I think that it would probably be up to, in my opinion, the property owner to choose whether or not it's located within that area. So I would encourage, some type of language that would, pretty much elaborate on that.
But wouldn't you think that the property owner would want it closer to the street than closer to the house? Okay, I'll speak it again. Okay, so if you extended that, would that mean that whatever device was put in there, the antenna would be closer to the house than to the street?
Could potentially. I mean, I think.
And wouldn't most people want it closer to the street than to the house? I mean, they wouldn't want it like, let's put it back there 50 feet so I have 10 feet to my house.
Sure. Yeah, and that's, something to think about. I mean, if the property owner granted permission, if we, had some language that referred to that, then we certainly could give the option for the property owner to choose that it be located within that 10-foot area or located closer or maybe not even located there at all, so.
Sandra, we haven't heard from you.
Sure. All of this, I think this is concerning. I've had the privilege of being on the Planning and Zoning Commission, the liaison there, and I've heard a lot of these arguments, and I can say that, are the health concerns there? Absolutely, they're there, and the commission realized that, and they tried to work themselves through that, and you are hamstrung by what you're able to do because of those regulations, and I think that that's what we're butting up against. And while I can understand wanting to try to put some different ordinances and regulations, I don't think that's going to do anything other than like add words and workarounds. I just don't think it's going to accomplish anything because I believe, like Art said earlier, when it really comes down to are the health concerns. So trying to find workarounds and trying to find ways to say it's not about health and find other ways, I just don't see how that's going to work. I will say that early on, in addition to the health concerns that I had worries about the historical preservation aspect of things, and we talked a lot about that. I was wondering how the National Registry fit into this, and it turns out that they don't have a lot of say in this either. And so while I hate to be one to say, gosh, the government's telling us what we have to do, and they are. And the Planning and Zoning went to our city attorney to ask about this, and she was very patient and answered many questions that all had to do with this. And when everything was said and done, and this was after months and months and months of work, and great work by Mike and his team to change everything and add things and take away things. And gosh, Mr. Hall was there so many times. We received many letters from the same people that the council received letters and emails from. Then they worked through all this. I truly do believe at this time, this is the best that we can do. I'm not saying I'm thrilled with it, but because we are hamstrung by what we're able to do, I think this is what we have to have.
Okay.
I have another. What about?
Brandy?
I saw in the attorney's memo that it could be, possibly there was mention that undergrounding in specific circumstances may be considered a reasonable restriction. So again, now I'm thinking of those neighborhoods that don't have any above ground utilities, which I'm sure they love that. And so that would mean building these new poles and now suddenly having them. And I think your opinion was that could possibly be considered a reasonable restriction in specific circumstances, but I don't think we have anything in that ordinance about undergrounding.
Well,
Let's have Mia talk about that.
those areas certainly have light poles. Those are, Avista provides light power. And those are certainly above ground. So I think that, in those considerations, you have to treat all the providers equally. You can't discriminate against one type of provider. And as long as you have light poles, I think you have to have the ability for those cellular providers to locate.
So you can't really envision neighborhoods right now that don't have these structures that would suddenly have these above-ground things, because you're saying they all at least have light poles already.
Correct.
Okay.
Okay. Okay.
I have one other question.
Okay,
So
go
what
ahead,
about and again, now I'm just thinking, is there, what things could we put in there just to spend a little more time to gain as much control as we can have? But the other things I was wondering about, as I saw taking away the, with the 5G, it's not necessary for them to provide a visual representation of what this would look like, but it is for the other facilities, and that was taken out. What was the thought process with not requiring the visual renderings?
Do you have a place on this, a page?
Let me see.
Well, I think the thought process behind that was that the scale, we have specific design standards for these small wireless facilities that we don't necessarily have for the larger macro cell towers. And so as long as they meet the design standards, which they're all required to do, then we can anticipate what they're going to look like. And for the, just for the scale of the installations, we didn't feel it was appropriate for numerous renderings to be presented.
And would it just be too time intensive, you feel, to review a visual, or for the provider to have to provide one?
It certainly wouldn't be time intensive on our end to review it, but we wouldn't necessarily review it for that long. It would be the plan set that we review just to make sure the shroud, the cantenna met all the dimensional standards that are contained within the code. So while it's nice and pretty and it gives you an idea of what it's going to look like, it's not something we necessarily look at for compliance with the code. Usually,
But it is with
when
the
you're looking
larger-
at those types of renderings, you're going through a public hearing. So if you have, it would be pointless to include all those renderings if it was just administrative review and they're co-locating. Certainly if they're a conditional use permit for a facility, they're already going to provide a number of renderings to be able to support their proposal moving forward through the public hearing. So, I don't have any doubt that they will submit those if it's a conditional use permit proposal, but just for an administrative review, I don't really see the point of requiring it.
Because regardless of how it looked from these different perspectives, if it meets the
Comes down to-
standards,
yeah.
it's irrelevant.
All
if
comes down to the
you like the look of
standards.
it or not, or if
Correct.
the neighbors like the look of it or not.
Correct.
Right. And the neighbors don't need to be notified with this
They will
at
if
all?
it's a conditional use permit, but for co-location and they're just permitted use, then they would not be notified, no.
Do we think that we want people to know if it's coming? Would people want to know? And not that they can do anything about it, but would they want to be notified by the city or by the providers that we are installing a small wireless facility outside of your home? And it will be installed sometime in the next month.
Well, I'd say that if we were able to regulate based upon health effects, then yes, but we don't do that for any of the other providers. They don't let you know that they're installing a new transmission box on a pole on this block this certain time of day. So just for the sake of treating everybody equal, which we're supposed to do, I don't see a reason for that.
Art?
Yeah, at this time, I'd like to make a motion to approve the proposed ordinance under suspension of the rules requiring 3 complete and separate readings, and it be read by title and published by summary.
Second.
Mr. Mayor?
Hang on just a second. Gina, do you second that?
I did, sir.
Okay, Ann?
Based on Robert's rules, I'm wondering if now would be the appropriate time to make an alternative motion, or if we need to vote on the first.
Well, we need to vote on the first, as far as I mean, because the motion's already made.
But can't she propose a friendly amendment?
Yeah.
Well, I wanted to propose an alternative.
Is that what you're looking at, Ann? Move to amend something?
I wouldn't call it an amendment, just that we accept it on first reading, because the proposed motion would be that we don't do that and that we take it into account that we've done 3. And I was just going to propose that we take it up on first reading, because I do have some additional questions and research that I would like to do. And I think that considering that P&Z spent a year on this, I would appreciate more time for consideration.
Okay, with that, with that being said, we still have to, because the first motion has to be voted on, and then we'd have to have a different motion if it failed. Is that correct, Gary?
If it fails, yes. Ann could move to amend.
Oh, I'm sorry, Gary, I can't hear you.
I was going to say that you could move to amend the motion that is on the floor by removing the suspension of the rules portion of the motion. And then that amendment could be, if it received a second, could be voted on. And if it's successful, then the original motion would move forward with that amendment.
I would like to make that motion.
So what does that mean? That motion that answered, I'm sorry.
Well, that it wouldn't be read, it would come back to us a second time, is how I understand it. How you understand it, Gary?
Yeah, so if I can paraphrase. So Ann, you would like to move to amend the motion by removing the suspension of the rules requiring 3 complete and separate readings, and it'd be read by title and published by summary, and instead would be considered on first reading.
Correct.
So if that does occur and it comes back, does that devolve back into what? Because the
There will be no
ordinance
additional
is
public
still
hearing.
the same, but then what happens? What is possible within that realm?
Well, you would not have, unless the council directed it, there would not be another public hearing. Council would consider the items that are before it, the record before it.
On the first
Could have
reading.
additional discussions, but you would not have to notice another public hearing.
And the reason I would appreciate that opportunity, a lot of really great information has been presented and included in our packet, all the public comment that's come in, but I would really appreciate the opportunity to continue to look at what some other municipalities are doing and be able to look at those ordinances for myself, not just have them referenced here. And I did do some of that before this meeting, but I would appreciate some additional time considering, I think, the weight of this particular ordinance.
Okay, Maureen?
I just need clarification from Gary. Does that mean it gets put on the agenda 2 more times? And that there is a hearing or there's not a hearing on it?
There's no hearing. The council could designate having another hearing, but it'll be in a public meeting. This isn't a quasi judicial matter, so you're not limited absolutely to the record that is made tonight. You could take additional testimony, or excuse me, not testimony, but
Information.
information at that time. I would say from a point, though, that the amendment is being discussed before it has a second. So
That's correct.
it's not appropriate.
I'll
before
second the
council.
motion, so we can keep talking about it.
Thank you. But yeah, and then what would happen if it came up on a second reading? Council could choose to suspend the rules and it could be passed that night, or they could say, we want to take it to a third reading.
Okay.
Now, that all being said, Gary, the council has to vote on the amendment, not the motion.
Yes, the amendment first, and then if the amendment
Passes.
is successful, then Art's motion is amended to include that language. If it fails, then it moves forward on its, as Art stated originally.
Okay, so I'm going to read.
Maureen's got one.
Go ahead.
This goes to Mia and to Mike. The question is there any downside to postponing this for another 2-4 weeks?
Well, I mean, like I stated earlier in the presentation, we currently have no requirements for small cell. So if a provider were to submit an application, we have no ordinance in place that really addresses the design standards that we're so concerned with. And so that would be my concern. But certainly 2 to 4 weeks, you can certainly ask me about that, but we're probably not.
Okay, but do we have
in too
anyone
much
who's
jeopardy.
applied right now?
Excuse me?
Do we have anybody who's applied yet?
No.
Do we
of
anticipate them
this is-
coming in the next month? I mean, I don't know. I mean, I don't know if it's happening all around us and,
Public Works, though, is a comment made that they typically they're going for larger cities, and we're probably quite ways off. But there's no way to know that. But that we're probably not a big target anytime soon was the.
And that we're just trying to be proactive and planning for the eventual application.
Sir, I have a question.
Okay, Gina.
What is our outcome here? I'm wondering what we hope to find. Is it more ways to prevent based on health issues? Or what are we hoping to have this 2 or 4 week outcome to be?
I'll go to Ann.
Yeah, I thought I was pretty clear on that. I wanted some additional time to review the specifics of what other municipalities are doing beyond what's been referenced tonight and not included in our packet. And I think that could be beneficial in considering how we would like to proceed.
Do you think that we lack certain pieces, or what are your concerns about the existing ordinance?
I think there have been several things that have been brought up tonight that would be potentially beneficial, and I would like to continue to do some digging into, again, what other municipalities are doing to approach this, because we have been limited, as we've noted, in what we're able to do beyond what some of our considerations and concerns might be. And so I think there's no harm in reviewing this again. I mean, the motion, the original proposed motion would be surpassing those 3 readings. I think that there's no harm in doing a second. And I would appreciate that time, and I'm asking for that as a member of the council.
I hear you, and I understand the need for more time. I do, however, think that we aren't going to get to the ability to block based on health reasons. No matter what other municipalities are doing, we aren't going to be able to do it. And I hear you, but I think if that is an outcome covered up by design standards or covered up by whatever, we're not going to get there. We've already been hamstrung.
I have no ulterior motive that would be what it is. I just want it to be the best code possible for our city and our situation.
I do too. I appreciate that.
And I think there's plenty of room to have that discussion.
Okay, well, with that being said, what we're going to be voting on is the amendment. The amendment is to approve the ordinance considered on the first reading. Correct, Gary?
Yes, sir.
Everybody understand that? I'll start with Art.
Nope.
Gina.
No.
Sandra.
Yes.
Maureen.
yes.
Brandy.
Yes.
And Ann.
Yes.
Okay, so that amendment passes. So now, the original motion, Gary, I mean, it's going to be the same motion now, correct? So we have to vote the motion that Art and Gina brought up that's going to have to be voted on as well, but it'll be,
As amended.
No, it got amended, didn't it?
well, it got amended, so it's a done deal.
Right.
It got amended. There still needs to be a vote that, you could still not pass the ordinance, you could reject it. So the motion now would go to, council would consider it on first reading, and you would have a vote on that.
Okay, so this one will be approve the proposed ordinance considered on the first reading, because it's been amended.
I would prefer that it be worded as consider the ordinance on first reading, since you're not approving it.
Okay, consider the ordinance on the first reading.
I'm not sure I understand what that means.
That appears like it's
Means it's gonna come
inconsistent.
back in 2 weeks, is what it
Well, then
means.
why are we okaying it? We just did.
Isn't that inconsistent to say that we approve the first reading, but we need more readings?
if you're approving the first reading, that wasn't the way it was worded, at least to me. What I thought I heard was approve it and have a first reading. So if it's approve it on first reading, then that would be appropriate.
I think that's
That's what we said, Gary. It was considered,
Then I misheard.
considered on the first reading, so.
So
was
consider but
approved
not
on the
approve.
first
We haven't
reading.
approved it.
Well, you're not, it's not, the ordinance is not approved. It
No,
does
it's just
not go into
it's
effect
considered,
after this
considered.
vote.
Say it again to us, and then we'll all know what we're, somebody take it down, because we need this down clearly.
Use different words.
No, there's
The
only one.
verbiage I would use is consider the ordinance on first reading.
Yep. That's what I've got written down. That is what we're voting on now. Consider the ordinance on the first reading, right?
But didn't we already do that?
We just didn't.
No, we made the amendment to do that.
No, we made an amendment from what it did say, under the suspension of the rules requiring 3 complete and separate readings. That's what we got rid of, because that was what the original motion was. We've done away with that. Now we're going to vote on consideration, the ordinance on the first reading.
Yeah, I mean, after conducting a public hearing and consideration of testimony received, we consider it on first hearing?
Yes.
Okay, there we go. It's easy.
What would it even mean to vote no on that? Haven't we already considered it?
Then you have rejected it.
Okay.
Either the motion passes or it doesn't.
Does everybody-
If you want to say approve and consider it on first reading, that's fine. We'll sort through it.
But I don't know
Is
what-
everybody okay with, know what they're going to be voting on here?
Not really.
So, and to sum it up, we're saying that, yes, we're gonna hear this again in 2 weeks.
That's exactly
and
right,
consider
on the second reading.
And at that time,
We're
we
just
may
considering
decide to
it.
approve it, or we may
You can
decide
approve it
to
on the
leave
second reading completely, or you can consider it for a third reading,
Okay.
correct? Gary?
Great.
Everybody understand that?
We've got it. Thank you, Gary.
Okay, I will,
I can throw a little more confusion at you.
Clarification.
Yes, it says that the way the code is written, the Idaho code is written, is that the rule that you're asking to waive requires 3 complete and separate readings. So consider it on first reading and waive the requirement for a complete reading tonight.
I love it.
Otherwise, you have to read the whole
Okay.
ordinance.
does that sound good to you, Ann?
Yeah, my real motive is a Parley Pro update for everybody. So yes,
Okay,
love it.
and is that okay with the seconder?
Yes.
Okay, I'll start to roll with Art,
Aye.
Gina,
Aye.
Sandra,
Aye.
Maureen,
Aye.
Brandy,
Aye.
and Ann.
Aye.
Okay, so the first reading is done, so we'll be looking for it in 2 weeks. Okay, well, I don't have to read an ordinance because it's not approved, so we will go on to the next item, which is a CARES Act and COVID. Thank you, Mike, for your great presentation. CARES Act and COVID update. Gary?
Thank you, sir. I'm actually glad we don't have a lot of parliamentary procedure questions on these.
Well, we have to think about them once in a while, so it's probably good to bring them up from time to time.
Well, it's a testament to our council that you don't have a lot of things that are considered on first reading. Typically, they're waived because I believe that the council's pretty informed on stuff like that. Okay, I'm going to ask Dave to come out here. Share my screen, sir.
Oh, yeah, that's why it's hard.
Oh, was it my own incompetence?
No.
It wasn't. Geez, that's a blessing.
Is it this one?
No, that's far
There it
left.
is. No, come on, Dave.
Thanks, sir. Thank you. Council requested that we keep the council informed about the potential of establishing metrics as the COVID virus continues to be active in our community. The report tonight will be fairly short. It'll focus mostly on those metrics. Talk about the CARES Act very little bit, and I'll just get that out of the way up front. The CARES Act, as you recall, was an allocation based on population of CARES Act money through the state of Idaho. And we had two allocations. One was for $887,100. Those were for direct costs that the city incurred or will incur because of its response to COVID. And then there was the second public safety salary reimbursement initiative that the governor had that required the council to essentially reduce their L2 property tax certification by $1.64 million, which matches the amount of those public safety salary reimbursement funds under the CARES Act, which will be made available. So we're working through that. Council made the decision that we will take advantage of the public safety salary reimbursement. That is in place, ready to go. The L2 has been received in Boise, and we're on that list. The $887,100, we continue to identify projects and things that the city has done in response to COVID. You've seen some of those and approved some of those. Computer equipment to promote remote work if it becomes necessary. The PPE, personal protective equipment that we've incurred. We also have some other things that we're working on right now, and they will come to the council. Council also approved certifying for pre-approval a mask testing machine. So we've got a couple more things that staff is working on, and we will bring those to you as we can. Okay, on to the metrics. Okay, what you see before you, and I'm sorry that if this is fairly small, but we've got a ton of data on here. This is a depiction, a graph that shows COVID infections. It's a 7-day moving average of confirmed COVID-19 cases in Latah County. And it is, we've taken the liberty of putting in some pertinent dates in here that might help us to kind of map how things have gone. You've got the opening playgrounds, you have the Idaho moves to rebound stage 4, public health order 20-03, which is the social distancing mask order. And then you have, University of Idaho students return, begin classes, Labor Day holiday, and of course, you can see the with the 7-day moving average, what happens after those events. So what we've tried to do is look at, okay, what is the incident of COVID infection in Latah County? We've even asked Carol Murley at the North Central Health District to help us break out City of Moscow data from Latah County as well. We're just starting down that path, so we're still, as we get that information, we will analyze it. So that's my first graph. Second one is this is the non-colored graph, if you will. Those lines are actual cases reported for those weeks. So you can see where that goes as well. So again, you get your 7-day moving average down here, and then you actually have the bar graph for the infection rate. And those are confirmed cases. Okay, where do these metrics come from, and how were they determined? You'll recall back, and I can't remember the exact date, but Public Health held a bunch of meetings and took data to try and find out what works for District 2. So they asked questions to hospitals, the public, government, as to what are the things that you think we should be looking at in order to determine whether or not there are going to be regulations that perhaps cause self-isolation, things like that. So this is the regional data tool that they came up with, and it's available on their website. And essentially, as you can see, they preferred the thermometer, which, of course, down here is green level. Green level is that you don't have any huge issues. And then, of course, you've got critical level up here where you're talking about quarantines and things like that. And I've got a different pair of glasses tonight, so I'm going to be switching back and forth here a little bit. The basis of that information was, and you can go through the, excuse me while I dig through my stuff here.
While Gary's looking for this, one of the things I'll say to everybody watching this from home and the ones that are in here on council is we reported when we talked about and we extended the mask mandate, when the council extended it, that we'd be given matrix and talking about this every several weeks. So that's what this report's all about, just to see where we're at. Okay?
Okay, thank you. So tying back into the information I just showed, as you can see, we've had quite a bit of increase. The 7-day moving average was very high for a time, and then it started to come down. Now it's on its way back up. So what really goes into that? If you look at the North Central Health District, still has Moscow's assessment at green. And the reason is because they have 3 different things they're looking at. And I'll jump ahead for just a moment. This was the base document for most of the plans around the United States from the Harvard Global Health Institute, and it talks about the things that you should consider as you're faced with a pandemic. So as you can see from there, there is information about testing, tracking, and supported isolation. So they call that TTSI, and that is one of the ways that you can find out how your community is doing. You test if somebody has, tracing, not tracking. You test, and then if someone shows an infection, then you trace where they have been and track it down. And then supported isolation, those people who are infected are then isolated until that passes. You've got, as you keep going all the way down, there are different things that they look at when looking at a pandemic. So that is the same thing that the North Central Health District did, and I just want to hit a few of those. We're still in the green, so that means these are the 3 criteria. New daily cases should be less than 1 per 10,000 residents. For Latah County, that would be 4. So we would have to be 4 or less infections. Today's count was 19. So obviously we are not in the green on that. However, we don't have hospital admissions of 0 to 5. Again, the 7-day moving average as a result of COVID. And test reporting that we have is being done in 1 to 4 days, which is the 3rd criteria. So you've got the incidence, then you have the number of hospitalizations, and then you have the ability to get test results. And the reason the test results are in there is if it takes a long time to get a test result, someone can be out doing things and infecting other people. The quicker you can get the test result, the quicker that you can have a turnaround. We're seeing that success at the University of Idaho right now with their testing program. So that is the reason, although we have a fairly significant infection rate or confirmed case rate, what we also have is we have the other 2 criteria that are very low. And then it goes up from there. They've got moderate risk level that confirmed cases are between 1 and 2.5 per 10,000 population. That would mean in Latah County we'd have 4 to 10 tests or cases per day. Again, today was 19. And then again, you look at hospital admissions and test results reporting in 5 to 9 days. So a longer period of time, the community's at a greater risk. So that's one of the things that they look at as well. And then it goes on from there. So, but you get the idea that they have different metrics that they try to look at. In talking to Carol, we're looking at a high infection rate, but we're not looking at a high hospitalization rate. We've had no deaths, and testing is actually pretty well done in Latah County. So that's how we remain for the North Central Health District. Under their metric, we remain in the green. However, as we know, that can change, and in my discussions with Carol, and you recall, she sent the council a letter in recommending extension of the social distancing and mask ordinance when you can't social distance because of many factors. One of those is that we have a fairly significant population living in the city of Pullman and Washington State University, just to the west of us, and their infection rate was quite high when I had that meeting with her. So her comments in the letter were that she does not see that issue going away over the next couple of months. Okay, again, back to the Harvard metric, and reading through it, it's really interesting, especially if you're an epidemiologist, but they do look at some different things. This is called Crush the Curve. It is, actually Brandy was the one who told me about it, so we started looking at it. It's got a framework for decision-making that was done on July 9th in 2020. It was hooked to the guidance for opening schools. So if you look at that, and they have Latah County as being in a high-risk category, and we'll get to that in a moment. So how do you define that? Large-scale community transmission, healthcare staffing significantly impacted, multiple cases within communal settings like healthcare facilities, schools, mass gatherings, etc. And so then you look at the level of operations, they talk about what you should do about that. So in our case, we had infection rates at the University of Idaho, which is a communal setting or a school, mass gatherings, that sort of thing. So that is why. If you go to elsewhere on their website, if you look at the different health districts around, here's District 2. It's in the high category, as is most of South Central or East Idaho and South Central Idaho. And so what does that really mean for us? If you go to the North Central Health District, it is high. And if you look through there, there's Latah County right there, and it is high as well. So again, they're using that metric that we just reviewed here, where they're talking about large-scale community transmission. We've seen increases as you go back to that original graph that I showed you. We are seeing significant increases, or did see significant increases in confirmed cases. So that is under this metric or this tool, they have us in a high category. Okay, this is Latah County, pulled right off the North Central Health District's website this afternoon. They have us at minimal risk, and you can look at the different metrics over here. Or these are statistics, I'm sorry, we already went over the metrics. So what does that really mean? Going further into their website, it means we have 823 cases, and they even reproduce on their website the incidence of COVID confirmed infections. So this, where it says deceased, is blank. We've had no deaths in Latah County. Whitman County has had 4. Over the weekend was, they moved to having 4 COVID-related deaths. We are lucky that we have none. However, as you can see, it's fairly intricate data, and you can go deeper into their website and break it out really intricately if you want to.
Did they have active cases, Gary? Because that 823 is from day one, right?
Yes.
So do we have any idea what the active cases are?
I'm sure they do, Your Honor, but if it's not on here, and this is not a live website, I'm sorry. This is just a screenshot. But yes, I believe that they do. In fact, I know that they do. I just don't have that information. Okay? Okay, so let's look at Whitman County. Whitman County combines these two data sets in their, and again, this was just done today, but as you can see, they're in the red category, community spread greater than 2 per day. one uncontrolled, I'm sorry, these glasses are killing me. What does that say?
Congregate outbreak.
Oh, thank you. Could you read the bottom
And
one
two
too
or
for
more
me?
controlled.
I'm too far
congregate
away from it
outbreaks.
to help you out. I can't read it from here either.
Okay, I'm sorry, I just couldn't make it big enough. But if you go over here, you can see that we're at 842, I believe it was, I think.
Like 16.
823, I'm sorry. COVID cases in Whitman County are 1682. They've had 15 hospitalizations. I have not got all of that information on the District 2 website, and I'm sure that's just my inability to find it. One person currently hospitalized and 4 fatalities. So they've got a different metric that they go by. So now we've seen 3 different metrics, and then you have the guidance of the Harvard Institute of Health's public health guidance as well. So as we've been trying to inform the council, and you guys have all read a ton of this as well, there is no metric out there that says, when you reach here, do this. Most of them say, look at the 7-day moving average, because that will give you a more true depiction. For instance, state of Idaho, or at least the North Central Health District, does not gather data on weekends, so they bring that out on Monday. So if you use a 7-day moving average, it's more accurate. So on and so forth.
One of the things we're looking at too, you have to take Pullman in consideration. They're 8 miles to the west of us, so you add those 2 numbers up, and it's 2,400 total.
Yeah, which was one of the things that Carol had mentioned when I discussed it with her, is that those people, those students, come over, freely shop in our city, as we want them to. They eat at our restaurants, they interface with other students over here. There's no wall at the border, so you have to take that vector of potential infection into consideration. So if you look at, is there a metric that says do this? That really, if you look at the Harvard document, it talks about, you look at rates of infection. One of the reasons that you're after testing so quickly is so you can quickly get on something, identify it, and curb it there. They don't recommend using death rates as a metric, because death rates are a lagging indicator. You've already been infected, so on and so forth. So it's like the mayor, I've learned more about epidemiology in the last 6-8 months than I ever wanted to know, but suffice it to say, it's like almost every other discipline except engineering, and that is that it changes a lot. So some of the other considerations as we continue to look at those metrics, and we will continue to look, is what are the other things you should look at? First, input and feedback from healthcare partners. Gritman, Public Health, Idaho North Central District, and our local physicians. Again, going back to the Harvard document and the North Central Health District's document, that is something that they stress, is you need to talk to the people who are actually in the trenches. And some of the metrics that they use in determining what level of risk you're at includes, what is the effect on your healthcare providers? Or do you have healthcare providers that are getting sick from infection? Do they have sufficient PPE to do their jobs? So those are some of the things. And we saw that early on in the COVID outbreak in some of the more populous areas. Secondly, input and feedback from our institutional partners. Moscow has huge institutional partners. Latah County, of course, we're a part of Latah County. What they do affects us, what we do affects them. But the University of Idaho is a huge institutional partner of the city of Moscow, as is the Moscow School District. They both have regulations in place for social distancing, the way they conduct their business, wearing masks, so on and so forth. So looking at a metric that does not consider feedback from those institutional partners is not advised either. Second, monitoring experience and conditions of surrounding jurisdictions. We just got done talking about Pullman, Washington State University. There are many people who either work in Moscow and live in Lewiston, or work in Lewiston and live in Moscow. So again, we can't discount Latah County, or Nez Perce County, or the city of Lewiston. What is our capacity to obtain testing and turnaround time for results? That is an area that we have a lot of capacity right now. I think the University of Idaho and Gritman Medical Center have done an outstanding job of making tests available and turning them around very quickly. Related hospitalizations, monitor that as well. And Gritman is very good about reporting that out. And related deaths, as I said, fortunately, we don't have any, but that's something that you do have to take into account. So those are just additional considerations. I'll stand for any questions that you have. Just wanted to inform you where we are with our work and what we're considering, but happy to focus in on an area that you would like. Otherwise, we will continue to obtain data.
Well, Gary, before I go to Maureen, Gary, one of the things that we've told our citizens is that we're going to be doing this so so folks can see why we're doing it and how we're doing it and how we're going about it, that we're just not doing something to do something. Now, Maureen, did you have something you wanted to?
I may have missed it, Gary. How many hospitalizations have we had? Three or four?
I thought that I can't make a representation because I've forgotten. I'm sorry.
Oh, that's fine.
It was fairly minimal, though.
Well, we'd had none until very recently.
Yes.
Well, the thing of it is, if we keep moving along, this is, I've said this a lot of times, lots of folks don't want to wear a mask, they don't like to wear a mask, but it seems to me like it is the right thing to do because we're keeping our businesses open. And I continue to get emails from time to time, people saying about lockdowns. There is no lockdowns. The wearing the masks and doing the social distancing and doing the things we're doing is keeping businesses open, keeps people feeling safe when they go in and do things. So thanks for the report, Gary. I mean, this is what folks
I
need
have a
to
question.
see. Okay, Brandy?
Yes, ma'am.
So, I mean, clearly, which I think is no surprise, but as you said, there isn't just a golden metric that we can just plop down and say this is what it's going to be. So this is complicated. There's options. Which ones do you look at? How do you combine them? So are you feeling optimistic that we will come to something objective, that we will be ready to say this is what we're shooting for? Or what's your opinion from the different conversations you've had so far and what you found?
Well, we all have high hopes, but I think if you talk to any of the medical experts from the CDC down, what they're in is the mode of taking as many precautions as you can while still granting folks as much freedom as you can. If you look at the data, read the different guidelines, they talk about, like I say, critical is quarantine, and then you get down to you don't have any incidents, and what you're really looking for is to early identify those people that may be infected. But they almost all of them recommend continuing social distancing and continuing wearing masks when you can't, and increased hygiene. Everybody's optimistic that a vaccine will be developed, so on and so forth, but I think there is a cautious optimism as we go into flu season, because we're really going into the time when people get the sniffles. I know at the city, we are having staff discussions at this point. Every sniffle, every sneeze, everybody with an upset stomach, do they quarantine, self-isolate for 2 weeks? Is there a way to get them checked? We have people with families who stay home with a sick child. Child may have flu. We had one staff member child had a sinus infection. Well, at the beginning, you don't know that, so we're self-isolating.
Well, the tricky part in all that is you're going right into cold season.
Yes.
You're going to have colds and you're going to have flus besides COVID-19. It's just going to happen. It happens every single year, so that's just part of it as well.
But as Jacob Marley, I can't give you a lot of comfort because I don't know.
Well, I think the thing that people want to know is, when will we say we don't need the mask mandate anymore, right? That wants some target, which I know is not easy. I would like to still try to identify what that could be so we can have something objective. It doesn't mean that we don't recommend wearing masks anymore, or don't recommend social distancing, but at what point do we feel it doesn't need to be mandated anymore based on our situation?
One of the things that some of the guidelines talk about is protecting vulnerable populations. And we've seen with about 2,200 cases across Whitman and Latah counties, and only 4 deaths. That is a pretty good or pretty mild mortality rate if you're just looking at statistics. However, those deaths occurred in people over 60 or over 70 years old, which could be compromised health, could be whatever. But you still have almost 2,200 folks who have not either been hospitalized or it's not given them a lot of problems.
There's another way of looking at that too, Brandy, is that you can go from a mandate down to an advisory type of a thing,
Right.
some point in time. I mean, it's just not gonna be like, okay,
Yeah.
the mask comes off and it's the Wild West for everybody and anybody.
Right.
I mean, you
It
gotta
doesn't mean it's
slope
over.
No, you gotta slope
Yeah.
this thing down, and maybe there becomes a mask advisory
Right.
that we do in our city, and, who knows? I mean, we've got, we're all over the place in the state, and of course, every area in the state's different. I mean, we became a hotter point because of infections at the university as well as Whitman County, and so that kind of threw things in, and so, it seems to me like it'd be a natural transition to go from a mandate to an advisory and then down, whenever
Right,
that
and
is.
kind of the opposite, because
You
we
know,
did have an
and-
advisory for quite a long time
Well-
until it was determined from all the different reasons laid out in the original emergency order that it rose to the time that it had to be mandated. But I
also
think
know-
that would be logical when the time comes, that we go back one step, back to advisory.
Well, and we also know that, Thanksgiving week, the university, the kids will be leaving university, going home, wherever home is at, and they'll be finishing the rest of the semester off during virtual, not being here. So, we're not gonna have that influx of students at that point in time, so, who knows? But that's another, around a month away, Maureen, you,
Okay, one thing about students leaving at Thanksgiving, many of the classes are closed at Wazoo, but students still came. Just because we told students not to come back doesn't mean they're not going to come back, and that they're not going to still stay in their rental houses. That's number one. Number two is, Gary, I want to say thank you for the work that you've done on this, because I think it's a really difficult and challenging task. And so when we ask and say, oh, what is the metric? There's this magic number out there. I mean, there's no. Fauci keeps saying the fall isn't looking good. We got to be really cautious. And so I guess I sit back there and think, continue with the good work and keep us apprised of what's happening. But I don't think there's this magic metric that's going to come tomorrow.
I would say that sums it up.
Yeah.
okay.
I would also certainly say that in the absence of that metric, for me personally, as long as we're still seeing, these big ups and downs, especially the ups, where things are not on a consistent decline, in my mind, that means we're not at that stage where it makes any sense whatsoever to back off right now when we're not seeing a several week history of things getting better. When they're getting worse, it's not
we're
the
gonna hear
time.
back in 2 weeks.
Yeah.
So every 2 weeks, we're gonna be doing this as we're going along, so.
Okay.
Gary, thanks for the report.
Thank you.
That is the conclusion of our meeting. However, we got reports. Ann, you got anything to report to us tonight?
I do actually. All of the commissions that I am liaison to and PBAC met in the last 2 weeks. I'm just pulling up my notes. So one of the highlights from the Farmers Market Commission was that one of the representatives who is also a vendor, one of the vendor reps, she was saying that the growers have had a really positive response to the motor-in option and would like to continue that in the future. And so it was just nice to hear that they've had a really positive experience and have seen an uptick in business and want to continue that regardless of circumstances next year. The big discussion at the MAC meeting was the Mayor's Art Awards, and the submission deadline for that was in September. So the commission is now just reviewing applicants and moving forward with that process. And then they also brought up this idea, obviously the world's weird right now, but talking about a third Thursday type event in town that would rotate to different businesses and would feature different artists. And so Megan Cherry had brought that up with the commission, and there was a really great discussion on that as well. And then for PBAC, so the one piece I wanted to note, we've been in the process of doing a LEAP analysis for the last year or so. That's legislative, executive, administrative, and public. And the results of that are supposed to be done soon. I think there was a slight delay, but I'm very eager to look at that. And that's really addressing any potential pitfalls to finding funding for an alternative. So a really big, important step in moving forward. And then, as David Hall mentioned tonight, the Polluted Space and Water Summit is this Thursday. It's 6 to 8, and it will be a speaker from the Brave Blue World Foundation and then a film featured as well. And that will be live streamed. So for anyone who's interested in joining for that, I think it will be always a really great event. And those are all of my updates.
Thank you, Ann. Brandy?
Transportation Commission met, and just some business officer elections, review of the Transportation Commission draft code amendments, and a streets standards review. The fun thing I got to do was participate in the very small Arbor Day Apple Guild event at Harvest Park that Robbie, I think, reported on. And so it was just really cool to be in Harvest Park with David Schott and other city staff and members of the tree commission. And I think we planted 3 trees and all these supporting. I learned what a guild is a community of plants that support each other by nitrogen and all these other, and so there were herbs and anyways, it was just really cool to be there and look around and try to envision what that is going to be one day and have a tangible, visible start to that. So I get to watch that grow. That was it.
Okay, thank you, Brandy.
Just one, the Building Code Advisory Committee met and considered the International Fire Code, and will be submitting to City Council their findings for approval of any modifications they've come up with in the next month or so.
All right, good. Art. Gina?
I reported on the Fair and Affordable Housing Commission at the last council meeting. I believe that Parks and Rec, you heard that awesome report this evening. I think they meet this week. I'm hoping to hear more about the what was it, calisthenics or something in the, there were going to be suggested calisthenics or suggested yoga poses or something in the parks. And I hope to bring back more solid information to you next time through.
Okay, thank you, Gina. Sandra?
Planning and zoning had a pretty, for planning and zoning, exciting meeting about rezoning the land for Schweitzer Engineering. I'm excited to have them present to the council. That'll be happening soon. And I think you'll enjoy the presentation there. And while we didn't really have a meeting within the 1912 Center, I can tell you it looks like those far stairs have been blocked off, are about to be in position to be used and be opened. And I do know that the Heart of the Arts is planning to put on their winter market, albeit, of course, COVID-style winter market. But we'll be able to participate in that in some form. And that's it for now. I'm still waiting for the others to happen.
Okay, thank you. Maureen?
My meetings are tomorrow and next week, except for the fire department. And the main thing that was interesting about the fire department is that there was a fire right in the beginning. And so all of a sudden, we're heading to the building and out goes a fire truck.
And so there they went.
We walked to the door and said we can have a meeting. So, I mean, we did, and nothing really stood out. You're still doing their changes and their transitions, and took pictures of themselves all doing their various things. And so, but the fire was a big one for me, and they finally met in person for the first time in months and months and months. And they went to Station 2. That's where we had our meeting. So
Nice.
there we go.
Well, I had a couple of things. On October 9th, we had an AIC board meeting and talked about, the biggest discussion was the legislative discussion about what we think legislators will be talking about in January through the March session. And of course, right on the top of the list was property tax. That's not a surprise because that was a discussion last year and it'll be a discussion this year. Broadband was another thing that'll be coming up. Gina, we know, especially for outlying communities. Quality-based servicing contracting with various vendors. We talked about that last year. They're working on that again this year. and protect and energy codes and standards with surrounding states so that they're tied in with what other states around us are doing. Those were the big things. They also did talk about doing some rewriting of some of the AIC bylaws, and they brought up that there will be a District Academy online November the 17th for those that are interested. I will have another board meeting on December the 3rd, and we'll have a little bit more direction about the legislative thing because there will only be a month out from that point in time. And the fun event was this past Saturday, October 17th. The Moscow Food Bank had a new dedication for a new building there. It was blessed by Bishop Christensen from Boise, which was a fun event. I was there, and it was a very neat thing. There was quite a few people there. All of us were all masked up, but anyway, they really made some huge improvements on that, and that the building they had some grants as well as donations that made it happen, and they got a lot of extra refrigeration space and room, so it's pretty doggone cool. If you ever want to see it, go down and look at it, because they did a wonderful job on that. And that's my reports. Gary, do you have anything for us?
I have nothing, sir.
Okay, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
All in favor, aye? We will, thank you, everybody. We'll close at 9 o'clock exactly. Thank you, everyone.